The cake hit me square in the face. Thick, cold buttercream smearing across my nose and splattering down my blouse. For a second, the room stood still. Forks paused midair. Conversations froze mid-word. I didn't move. I let the frosting drip onto my lap in silence, and then, slowly I reached up, wiped cream from my eyes, and stood. The chair screeched against the hardwood as I pushed it back. All 22 people at that long dining table, relatives I hadn't seen in months, some in years, watched me with a mix of surprise, smugness, and in my mother's case, barely concealed satisfaction. She didn't even look guilty, just proud. "Well," she said with a shrug, "if you're going to be selfish, then expect consequences." Camille looked down at her plate, her hand resting protectively on her barely there bump. Kevin, her fiancé, stared at me like I'd just slapped a baby. I didn't say a word. Not yet. Not in that house. I grabbed my purse with frosting sticky fingers, turned toward the front door, and walked out. Out of that house, out of their games, out of the role I'd played for 30 years. The responsible one. The understanding one. The one who always gave in. Outside, the February wind slapped against my cheeks, but I welcomed it. It reminded me I still existed, that I wasn't just a set piece in someone else's celebration. My heels clicked sharply on the icy steps as I made my way to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, trembling, not with cold, but with rage and something deeper. A realization. This wasn't about a cake. It wasn't even about Camille's pregnancy. It was about a lifetime of being expected to sacrifice without hesitation. And finally, I had said no. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Maybe you're wondering how things got so ugly, so fast. Maybe you're thinking, there has to be more to the story. And you'd be right. Because just 2 weeks ago, I was still painting the walls of my new apartment, singing off-key to Fleetwood Mac and thinking, naively, that this year was going to be different. I'd spent 8 years working toward that apartment. 8 years of sacrificing every luxury, every whim, every vacation and holiday, while my friends were off backpacking through Europe or getting engaged at rooftop bars. I was making spreadsheets for regional audits and clipping coupons to stretch my grocery budget. I wasn't bitter about it, not then. It felt good being disciplined, like I was building something solid in a world full of temporary thrills. The apartment itself wasn't fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a cracked tile entryway, and a kitchen with grout older than I was. But it was mine, fully paid, no mortgage, no roommate drama, just peace and silence and the warm glow of something earned. That peace didn't last long. It was the second Tuesday of February when my phone rang. I remember because I was halfway through scraping off a patch of floral wallpaper that looked like it belonged in a haunted dollhouse. I just dropped my putty knife and wiped a streak of dust from my forehead when I saw the name on the screen. Mom. Something about the way she said my name that day, Natalie Sweetheart, made my stomach tighten. She only used that tone when she wanted something. "We're having a little family get-together this Saturday," she said. "Nothing big. Just dinner, you know. Camille and Kevin will be there, and your uncles and Aunt Marcy and the cousins. Oh, and could you bring one of those chocolate cakes from that bakery near you? You know, the one with the buttercream frosting." I hesitated. "Wait, all of them? What's the occasion?" "Oh, just a surprise," she said. Her voice was light, too light. "Just be here at 4. Sharp." I should have known then. I should have trusted my gut. But I wanted to believe it was something harmless, something normal. I didn't know that 9 days later, I'd walk out of that house with cake on my face and a resolve I never thought I had. The truth is, I didn't buy that apartment for the space or the view or even the independence. I bought it because it was the only thing in my life that no one else could take credit for. Not my parents, not my sister, not anyone. Every cent that went into that down payment came from my own hands. Shaking coffee into mugs during audit season, rebalancing spreadsheets at 10 p.m., saying no to every spontaneous girls' trip or luxury handbag that tempted me during my 20s. When I started saving, I was 22, fresh out of college, working at a mid-sized accounting firm in downtown Denver. My salary was modest, my apartment was barely livable, and my social life was virtually non-existent. But I had a plan. I remember printing out a photo of a 2-bedroom apartment from a real estate blog and taping it to the inside of my closet door. Every time I chose to stay in, pack lunch, or say no to another after-hours hangout, I'd look at that photo and remind myself, one day this will be worth it. Years passed. Promotions came slowly. Raises were incremental. Camille, meanwhile, floated from one creative passion to another. She tried modeling, interior design, even a dog bakery business that lasted 2 months. My parents funded every endeavor. She's just finding her path, they said, as if responsibility was a burden only I needed to bear. They never offered me a dime, not for rent, not for books, not even when I maxed out my credit card after a dental emergency. You're the stable one, Natalie, my dad would say proudly. You'll land on your feet. Maybe he meant it as a compliment, but all I heard was, you don't get help. You don't get softness. You get to carry everyone else. And I did. By the time I turned 30, I had nearly $200,000 saved. Then my grandmother Evelyn passed and everything shifted. She had always been the only family member who treated Camille and me equally. When she died, she left behind a modest inheritance, about $110,000, to be split between us. I remember the look on my mother's face when she found out. Shocked, almost annoyed, as if she thought Camille should have gotten it all. With my half of Grandma Evelyn's gift and my years of savings, I finally had enough. I contacted a realtor. I toured 7 different properties. And then I found it, a second-floor walk-up in Washington Park, 10 minutes from my office, with creaky hardwood floors and terrible wallpaper, but incredible light. The moment I stepped into that space, something in my chest unclenched. I made the offer. I signed the papers. I wired $300,000 without needing a loan. And when the keys dropped into my palm, I stood in the center of the empty living room and laughed. Not the poised, polite chuckle I was known for. This was a full-bellied, tears in my eyes kind of laugh. The kind that only comes after holding your breath for a decade. The next few weeks were chaos, but the good kind. I spent my evenings on YouTube learning how to paint walls, patch holes, and remove decades-old linoleum. I turned my weekends into renovation marathons. My hands were constantly covered in paint. My back ached from crouching over baseboards. But I'd never felt prouder. It wasn't glamorous. I didn't post photos online. I wasn't looking for praise. But every time I peeled off a strip of hideous wallpaper, I imagined shedding another layer of the person I used to be, the one who always said yes, who always sacrificed, who always smiled even when she wanted to scream. And then came the phone call, the one from my mother, the one that should have made alarm bells go off in my head. Instead, I told myself she just missed me. That maybe, just maybe, she wanted to celebrate this milestone with me. I even bought her favorite cake. It was a gray Saturday afternoon when I pulled into my parents' driveway in Aurora. The sky hung low with clouds, and a light mist coated the windshield as I parked between my cousin Trina's SUV and Uncle Mark's ancient pickup. My heart gave a small thump. I hadn't seen this many cars outside my childhood home since Grandma's memorial. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. There was a speck of dried paint in my hair and a tiny nick on my chin from a run-in with a caulking knife. I sighed, ran my fingers through my ponytail, and grabbed the cake box from the passenger seat. The bakery had outdone themselves. Rich chocolate layers, smooth buttercream swirls, and delicate caramel curls on top. Mom's favorite. The box felt heavier than it should have. When I stepped inside, the scent of pot roast and green beans hit me like a wall of nostalgia and dread. "Natalie's here," my mom called from the kitchen, her voice bright and artificial. Within seconds, she appeared, air-kissing my cheek and taking the cake with a performative flourish. "Perfect timing, sweetie. We're just about to sit down." The house looked too perfect. The dining table was covered in a linen cloth, usually reserved for Thanksgiving. Her good china sparkled under the chandelier, and the silverware was arranged with surgical precision. It was a performance, and I'd unknowingly been cast in the lead role. Camille and Kevin were already on the couch, hands clasped like porcelain dolls, their expressions unreadable. I gave them a polite nod and a tight smile. "What's going on?" I asked. Camille just smiled faintly and looked away. The rest of the guests flowed into the dining room, laughter and small talk buzzing like background static. I took my seat beside my cousin Trina, who leaned over and whispered, "Do you know what this is about?" I shook my head. No idea. We passed around mashed potatoes and roasted carrots. I tried to act normal, but the tension curled in my stomach like a fist. Something was coming. Something big. Once everyone had a full plate, and the clinking of silverware gave way to murmured conversation. Mom rose from her seat, holding a wine glass like she was about to toast. She tapped it with a spoon. Ting, ting, ting. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I know it's short notice, but we have some wonderful news to share." All eyes turned to Camille. She blushed and looked down. Kevin squeezed her hand. "Our Camille," Mom said proudly, "is expecting. We're going to be grandparents." Cheers erupted around the table. Trina gasped. Aunt Marcy clapped her hands. Someone behind me whistled. I clapped, too, hesitantly but genuinely. "Congratulations, Camille," I said, offering a smile. But Mom wasn't done. Her tone shifted, softening to something more calculated. "And we have one more bit of news. A small request, really." She glanced at Dad, who gave a silent nod, then turned to me. "You know, Natalie recently bought herself a beautiful apartment. Such a big place for just one person, don't you think?" She paused, scanning the room as if gathering allies. "And with Camille starting a family, well, she and Kevin could really use a proper home. Something stable. Something close to us." I felt the blood drain from my face. My fork hovered in midair. Mom smiled. "Natalie, sweetheart, this is your chance to really show what family means to you. Would you consider giving your apartment to Camille and Kevin?" The room fell silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to pause. I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "You've already proven you can take care of yourself," Mom continued smoothly. "You're so responsible, so smart. You can find another place. But Camille, well, she's pregnant. She needs security. She needs family." I looked at Camille. She refused to meet my eyes. Kevin stared at his plate. Dad chimed in. "It's just an apartment, Natalie. You're single, no kids. Do you really need all that space?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. A lifetime of being the one who never caused a scene sat like a weight in my throat. Then Aunt Marcy added, "That's such a generous idea. Family should always come first." And in that moment I realized this wasn't a suggestion. It was an ambush. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping across the floor like a warning. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice low but steady. "You're asking me to give away the apartment I spent 8 years saving for? The one I just bought outright, with no help from anyone? You want me to hand it over, because Camille got pregnant?" My mother's smile faltered. "Now don't get dramatic, Natalie." "Dramatic?" I echoed. "You just asked me to give away everything I've worked for." Dad leaned forward. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. We're a family. Families sacrifice for each other." Funny. That word, sacrifice, it always seemed to mean me. Me giving up. Me shrinking. Me handing things over with a forced smile while Camille drifted through life with a safety net I never had. I looked around the table. The relatives averted their eyes. No one said a word in my defense. "Absolutely not," I said finally. My voice didn't shake. "The answer is no." Camille gasped. Her hand shot to her barely visible belly. "Natalie, please. This isn't just about me. It's about the baby." My jaw clenched. Then maybe you and Kevin should have thought about that before bringing a child into a rental you can't afford. There was an audible gasp. Kevin's face twisted in disbelief. How can you be so heartless? My chest burned. Heartless? You're asking me to give up the one thing I've earned completely on my own. And for what? Because Camille's pregnant? So is half of the cast of Teen Mom. Mom slammed her hand on the table. That's enough. You've always been like this, selfish, cold, unwilling to put others first. You work in a spreadsheet all day and think that makes you better than the rest of us. I stared at her, stunned. This isn't about spreadsheets. This is about boundaries. And I'm done pretending I don't have any. You're unbelievable, Dad muttered, shaking his head. You'd really let your sister struggle while you sit in that big empty apartment alone. I stepped back, grabbing my coat from the chair behind me. Yes, I said simply. Camille burst into tears, loud and theatrical. Kevin wrapped an arm around her, glaring at me as if I'd physically harmed her. The whispers around the table began again. So cold, so materialistic, always the difficult one. Mom stood abruptly, knocking over her wine glass. Her cheeks were red with fury, and then in one horrifying second she grabbed the untouched cake, the one I'd picked up that morning, the one I'd chosen specifically because it was her favorite, and hurled it at me. It hit my face with a dull, sickening thud. Frosting exploded across my cheek, my hair, my coat. Chocolate and cream dripped from my chin. Time froze. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I reached up, wiped a thick swipe of icing from my eyelashes, and looked my mother in the eye. And then I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard her yell, "Selfish girl. After everything we've done for you." Dad's voice joined hers. "You've disgraced this family." Camille sobbed louder, wailing something unintelligible, but I was already at the door. My hands were sticky. My blouse was ruined. My dignity somehow was intact. I got into my car with Frosting still clinging to my collarbone. My hands trembled as I turned the key in the ignition. The silence inside the vehicle was deafening. I didn't even wipe the cake from my face right away. I just sat there, trying to catch up with what had just happened. They had ambushed me, demanded something unthinkable. And when I said no, they retaliated like children denied a toy. And in that surreal, sticky silence, I understood something I should have known a long time ago. They never saw me as a daughter. I was a tool, a resource, a walking checkbook. I didn't cry on the drive home. Not once. I kept both hands on the wheel, even though they were still sticky with frosting, my knuckles white with restraint. The highway lights blurred past me like ghosts, but my mind wasn't on the road. It was replaying every word, every stare, every bite of silence from that dinner table. No one had spoken up. Not one person had said, "This is wrong." I pulled into the parking garage beneath my apartment building and sat there for a while, the engine ticking as it cooled. Finally, I climbed the stairs, unlocked my door, and walked into the apartment I'd poured my soul into. Paint cans still sat in the corner. The drop cloth lay where I'd left it that morning, like the world hadn't shifted. But it had. In the bathroom mirror, I saw the reflection of a woman who no longer recognized herself. Not because of the smudged mascara or the streaks of chocolate across her cheek, but because something had snapped. Quietly, irrevocably, I peeled off my coat, tossed it in the laundry basket, and stepped into the shower fully clothed. Warm water soaked through the frosting, through the shame, through the years. I stood there until the water ran cold, until I could breathe again. When I finally got out, I dried my hair, wrapped myself in an old sweater, and collapsed on the couch. My phone buzzed, once, then again, then relentlessly. Dozens of texts. I hesitated, then opened them. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. This is about family. Dad, after everything we've done for you. Camille, I can't believe how selfish you are. The baby could have had a home. Kevin, Hope your fancy apartment keeps you warm when you've got no one left. Then came the notification that turned my stomach cold. Marion Green tagged you in a post. I opened Facebook. It breaks my heart to say this, but family isn't always what you hope. My daughter Natalie refused to help her pregnant sister in her time of need, even though she has more than enough. As a mother, I am devastated. Please keep us in your prayers as we try to navigate this painful betrayal. The post had nearly 100 likes already, with comments from cousins, old neighbors, church friends. Unbelievable. I was there. Natalie was cruel. Camille deserves better. Some people don't understand what family means. Pregnant and homeless? That's a new low, Natalie. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a character in a film unravel. I scrolled down, heart thudding, looking for even one voice of reason. There was none. No one asked what had really happened. No one questioned why I should give up a $300,000 home just because my sister got herself pregnant. No one mentioned the cake. And in that silence, deeper than any scream, I remembered. I remembered the summer I was 13 and needed new shoes for a school trip. Mom said we didn't have the money. That same weekend, Camille got a new iPod. I remembered my 16th birthday. My friends came over for pizza and cake in the basement while Camille got a rented venue, balloons, and a brand new car a year later. I remembered coming home from my college graduation to find a note on the fridge. Left early for Camille's show. Congrats! There's leftovers in the fridge. Every time I'd swallowed it, smiled through it, told myself, this is what being the strong one means. They just depend on me more. But now I saw it for what it really was. A pattern, a system, and I'd been trained to play my part. The quiet, capable one. The one who didn't need. Until I did. And when I finally said no, they threw cake in my face. I turned off my phone and set it on the coffee table. The apartment was quiet, warm, safe, and suddenly I wasn't tired. I was angry and clear. They were living in a house that didn't belong to them, a house I owned half of, a fact I'd never thought to use, because I never imagined I'd need to. Until now. The next morning, I woke up with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The kind of clarity that doesn't come from sleep, but from finally crossing a line that should have been drawn long ago. My phone sat silent on the nightstand. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. The damage had been done, and I wasn't interested in apologies typed with trembling thumbs. Instead, I walked over to my filing cabinet, something I'd held onto since my first apartment, back when my office was just a fold-out table in a corner. I flipped through the folders until I found it. Evelyn Green Estate. My grandmother's will, notarized and signed. The original copy she had mailed me before she died. I opened the document and read it again, slowly, though I'd already memorized every word. It was all there in black and white. 50% of the house in Aurora belongs to me. 50% to Camille. No mention of our parents. No provision for them to live there indefinitely. Just a simple, equal split between two granddaughters Evelyn had loved, at least in her mind, equally. I sat back, staring at the paper. That house wasn't theirs. It never had been. They had stayed there out of convenience, out of habit, out of assumption. But now, after everything, I was done being convenient. I pulled out my laptop, searched Real Estate Attorney Denver, and clicked on the first listing with solid reviews. Carter and Bell Legal Services. I dialed the number before I could talk myself out of it. Carter and Bell, this is Sandra, said a calm voice on the line. Hi, said. My voice cracked a little, but I didn't stop. I'd like to speak with someone about property rights. It's urgent. They scheduled me for the same afternoon. I spent the next few hours cleaning the apartment, not out of obligation, but instinct. Movement helped me think. I scrubbed buttercream from the doorknob, threw the soiled blouse in the trash, and made a list of everything I remembered from that dinner. Who was there, what was said the moment my mother launched dessert across the room like a weapon. At exactly 3:15 p.m., I stepped into the law office. It was tucked between a dentist and a yoga studio, unassuming from the outside, but quiet and well-appointed inside. A receptionist offered me coffee. I declined. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Edwin Carter, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with a no-nonsense tone and a reputation, according to Google, for ruthless efficiency. "Start from the beginning," he said, flipping open a yellow legal pad. I did. I told him everything. How I bought my apartment, how my family tried to take it, how they turned on me when I refused, how they publicly shamed me, and how I had legal ownership of half the house they were still living in like it was theirs. He didn't interrupt, just nodded, took notes, and occasionally raised an eyebrow at some of the more absurd details, like the cake. When I finished, he set down his pen. "Let me be clear," he said. "You are the legal co-owner of that property. You are entitled to either compensation or a sale. Your parents have no legal claim. If you want to pursue this, you absolutely can." "And the process?" I asked. "I'll draft a formal notice of intent to sell your share. Your sister can choose to buy you out at fair market value. If she can't or won't, the property will need to be sold and the proceeds split. If they refuse to cooperate, we file with the court. You'll win." I exhaled slowly. "Do it." He smiled faintly. "Good. We'll send the notice, certified mail. Keep everything in writing from now on. And if your family tries to contact you directly again, especially aggressively, document it." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I have a 15-minute voice recording. They came to my apartment, yelled through the door, called me names. His eyes lit up. "That's even better." I walked out of that office lighter, but not because someone had solved my problem. No, because for once, I had stopped being the problem solver. I wasn't fixing anyone else's life. I was protecting mine. The line had been crossed. I wasn't going back. 3 days passed in relative silence. I blocked Mom's number, then Dad's, then Camille's. I didn't answer the door unless I'd ordered delivery. I spent my time sanding cabinet doors, updating my resume just in case, and emailing Edwin back and forth about timelines, market value estimates, and certified letters. Then, on the 4th day, just after 5 p.m., I heard it, a pounding on my door. First sharp, then insistent. I froze. For a moment, I hoped it was a neighbor or a package mix-up. But then I heard her voice. "Natalie, open the door. This is ridiculous." My mother. I walked quietly to the door and looked through the peephole. There they were, all 4 of them, Mom, Dad, Camille, and Kevin, standing in the narrow hallway of my apartment building like an angry tribunal. I didn't open the door. I didn't say a word. But I did one thing. I pulled out my phone and pressed record. "You're going to regret this." Mom shouted, "You're tearing this family apart over some apartment. After everything we've done for you." "You're being selfish, Natalie," Dad added, his voice booming like thunder through the metal door. "You're making your pregnant sister homeless." Camille started crying, loud, theatrical sobs. "You're destroying our lives. I can't believe you're doing this to your own nephew." I kept recording. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. They banged on the door again. Kevin chimed in. "You want to be alone forever, is that it? Bitter and childless in that stupid apartment." My fingers clenched tighter around the phone. Not because the words hurt, but because they didn't. Not anymore. They yelled for nearly 15 minutes. Demands, insults, guilt trips that would have flattened the version of me from 5 years ago. But this time I didn't flinch. I let the silence between us speak louder than their fury. Eventually they gave up. I heard Mom curse under her breath, heard Dad grumble about getting the lawyer involved. Then their footsteps faded. As soon as they left, I emailed the audio file to Edwin. He called me back within the hour. "This is gold," he said. "They just handed us leverage. If they try to stall the sale, this proves they've created a hostile environment. It strengthens your case for forcing a sale through the court, if necessary." "Good," I said quietly. "Let's be ready for that." The next morning, I made the mistake of checking Facebook. There was a new post. Longer, angrier. Some of you have asked for an update. Yes, it's true. Natalie is trying to force us out of our home. The home her sister was raised in. The home her father built with his hands. She's lawyered up, threatening legal action. She doesn't care that Camille is pregnant. She doesn't care about family. Please keep us in your thoughts. The comment section was ablaze. Unreal. That's your child, Marianne. Natalie always was cold. Money changes people. I'd be ashamed to call her my daughter. What kind of person does that to a pregnant woman? I didn't comment. I didn't defend myself. What would have been the point? These people weren't interested in truth. They wanted drama. They wanted a villain. And Mom had given them one. That evening, a coworker messaged me privately. Hey, just saw something your mom posted. Are you okay? I typed, I'm fine. Just handling things. Then deleted it. Then typed again. Truth is messier than Facebook. Thanks for checking in. I didn't hear from my parents again for the rest of the week. Camille went silent. The online outrage eventually moved on to someone else's scandal. But something had shifted. They now knew I wouldn't cave. Not this time. The next call I got was from Edwin. His voice was calm, professional, but with a note of satisfaction. Their attorney reached out. They want to mediate. I smiled for the first time in days. Not a big, victorious grin, just a quiet acknowledgement. So they're finally taking me seriously. Monday arrived colder than usual, the kind of chill that clung to your collarbones no matter how tightly you wrapped your coat. I arrived early to Edwin's office, dressed in my best navy blue pantsuit, the same one I wore to annual audits and boardroom presentations. Not to impress them, but to remind myself who I was. Edwin met me in the waiting area with a firm nod. Stay calm. Stay factual. They'll try to spin this as emotional. Don't take the bait. I won't, I said, and I meant it. At exactly 10 a.m., the elevator doors opened, and my parents walked in. Camille followed behind, hand in hand with Kevin. She looked pale. My mother, on the other hand, looked like she was walking into war. Lips pressed tight, eyes burning with blame. My father avoided my gaze entirely. Their lawyer was a younger man, maybe late 30s, with slick hair and the kind of forced smile that said, I've cleaned up worse messes than this. We all sat in the conference room. Edwin began. He laid out the facts, calmly and without embellishment. Miss Green owns 50% of the property in question. That is not disputed. The house cannot be maintained jointly unless both parties agree. My client has chosen to exercise her right to sell or request a buyout at fair market value. Their lawyer spoke next. The sale of the home would cause emotional and logistical hardship. My clients have lived there for over 20 years. They see it as their primary residence. Edwin slid a file across the table. Here is the audio recording of them showing up at my client's apartment, using threatening and manipulative language. And here, he tapped another sheet, is a printout of the public Facebook post made by Marian Green, in which she discloses details of the dispute and invites public judgment. This behavior qualifies as hostile. There was a beat of silence. Then Mom spoke, her voice suddenly soft, almost trembling. Natalie, please. I lost my temper, okay? I shouldn't have thrown the cake. I shouldn't have posted online. But we're family. How can you take us to court like this? I looked her in the eye. You didn't just throw cake, Mom. You threw away the last ounce of respect I had for you. Dad shifted uncomfortably. We said things we didn't mean. But you've always been the strong one. Can't you, just this once, bend for your sister? Camille wiped a tear from her cheek. Whether real or rehearsed, I couldn't tell. I'm about to have a baby, Natalie. Your nephew. Don't you want to be part of that? It hit me then, not just the manipulation, but the entitlement. They didn't think they'd done anything wrong. Not really. They still believed this, was about an argument, a misunderstanding. They had no idea they were the reason I no longer saw them as family. "The house will be sold," I said, quietly but firmly. "That's final." Their lawyer tried once more to stall, to renegotiate terms, but Edwin shut it down with surgical precision. The agreement was signed that day. The house would be appraised, listed, and sold. The proceeds, after taxes and fees, would be split between Camille and me. No exceptions, no loopholes. When we stood to leave, my mother brushed past me, her shoulder cold and stiff. My father gave me a single, unreadable glance. Kevin didn't say a word. Camille paused. Her eyes searched mine. "I really thought you'd come through for me," she whispered. "I did," he said. "I came through for myself." As they walked out, Edwin turned to me. "You handled that well." I nodded, but inside my hands are trembling, not with fear, not even with anger anymore, but with release. For the first time in my adult life, I had chosen myself. And I wasn't sorry. The sale moved faster than I expected. The market was hot, and the old house, despite its aging shingles and creaky floors, was in a desirable part of Aurora. Within 3 weeks, it was under contract. Another 2, and the closing was final. The proceeds came in just shy of $350,000 after taxes and realtor fees. Camille and I each received a wire transfer of $175,000. Edwin sent me the confirmation, along with a simple message. "Congratulations, you're free." Free. The word echoed inside me as I stared at the transaction on my screen. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about knowing that they couldn't hold it over me anymore, that I wasn't bound to them by guilt, by duty, by the weight of being the responsible one. I wasn't here to make anyone's life easier at the cost of my own. I never saw the inside of that house again, never picked up a single item. Everything I wanted had been gone from there for years, probably since Grandma Evelyn passed. Through Edwin, I learned that Camille had decided to use her share as a down payment on a house with Kevin in Lakewood, a small 3-bedroom with a 30-year mortgage. My parents would be moving in with them indefinitely. They didn't qualify for a mortgage of their own. No savings, no plan, just decades of assuming someone else would always provide. I wish I could say I felt triumphant, or even smug, but mostly I just felt done. I took my own share of the money and sat down with a financial advisor. We diversified: stocks, bonds, REITs. I set aside a small portion for travel. Real travel, not the kind I used to daydream about while eating lunch at my desk. And then I went back to painting, to repairing cabinet hinges, to slowly transforming my apartment into something that reflected not just effort, but identity. 2 months after the mediation, the apartment looked nothing like it had when I moved in. Gone were the outdated fixtures, the sickly beige walls, the chipped baseboards. I installed new flooring myself, dark wood planks that clicked into place like puzzle pieces. I replaced the light fixtures with warm gold accents. I framed photos of places I'd been meaning to visit and hung them in the hallway like promises. There was no housewarming party, no social media tour, no look at me now revenge post. Just quiet, just space, just mine. And then one afternoon, while sipping tea on my tiny balcony overlooking the city, my phone buzzed with a message from a mutual friend. Camille had the baby. 7 pounds, 6 ounces. Everyone's fine. I stared at it for a long moment, waiting for some flicker of emotion. Sadness, guilt, regret. But nothing came, just the familiar click of distance. I wasn't invited to the baby shower, or the birth, or the hospital, and that was okay, because I knew what they were telling him, what they'd always told everyone, that I was cold, difficult, the one who said no. Let them. Let him grow up hearing that version of the story. If I had to be the villain in their fairy tale, to finally be the hero in my own life, so be it. Later that night, I opened the small cedar box on my bookshelf, the one with Grandma Evelyn's handwriting still visible on the lid. Inside was an old photo of the two of us. I was 10, she was holding a garden hose and laughing like we'd just discovered water. She always saw me, not for what I could give, but for who I was. "Thank you," I whispered, touching the photo with 2 fingers, "for believing in me when no one else did." Outside, the sky was streaked with gold and rose, the sun dipping below the Denver skyline. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't carrying anything anymore. Not a family's weight, not a role, not a debt, just a future I had finally made room for. 6 months ago, if you'd told me I'd be estranged from my entire family, I would have laughed and said, "Not possible. I'm the glue." That's what they always made me believe, wasn't it? That I held things together, that I kept the peace, that I was the mature one, the selfless one, the dependable fallback when things went wrong. But that was the trap. They made me believe that endurance was love, that obedience was virtue, that silence was strength. But the truth is, strength doesn't come from swallowing injustice. It comes from spitting it out. Since the house sold, I haven't spoken to my mother. Not once. She hasn't apologized. Not for the cake. Not for the post. Not for asking me to give up everything I earned for a sister who's never earned anything on her own. My father? A text, 1 line long, came 3 weeks after the sale. "Hope you're happy now." I didn't reply. Camille never reached out either. I heard, through a friend of a friend, that she and Kevin are struggling to make mortgage payments, that my parents, still unemployed, are arguing with them weekly, that the baby cries all night and no one can agree on who's supposed to get up and deal with it. And that's not schadenfreude. I don't wish them misery. I just no longer offer myself as the cushion beneath it. I go to work. I make dinner for one. I light candles for no reason. I joined a pottery class on Thursday nights. I booked a solo trip to Lisbon for spring. I've started sleeping with the windows open. I keep rosemary and mint growing in tiny clay pots by my kitchen window. My apartment smells like lemon oil and quiet. And when people ask, "Do you miss them?" I tell them this. I miss the idea of them, the version of my family that I spent decades trying to become worthy of. But that family never existed. What existed were expectations, roles, performances, and mine was always to be the provider of peace, no matter how much it cost me. Not anymore. Now, when I think about love, I think about people who don't flinch when you set a boundary, who don't call you cruel for having limits, who don't define family as blood, but as behavior. Because family is not the people who demand that you give until there's nothing left. Family is the people who clap when you keep something for yourself and say, "Finally!" I kept the cedar box with Grandma's handwriting. I kept the deed to my apartment in a fireproof drawer. I kept my name, my dignity, and the knowledge that I didn't burn the bridge they set on fire and told me to walk across it anyway. And I said no. No to being the sacrificial daughter. No to being the one who always folds. No to the belief that love must always hurt. If I ever have a child, biological or otherwise, I'll tell them this story. Not as a tale of vengeance, but of escape. I'll tell them how I built a life with nothing but grit and spreadsheets and long nights of doubt. How I almost gave it all away to be called a good sister. And how I learned that good is not the same as small. I'll tell them that saying no can be the most loving thing you ever do for yourself. And that sometimes when the cake hits your face, it's not the end of the story. It's the beginning.